Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for Ask the Expert North Texas. I'm Kristen Diaz.
I'm David Rankin. Tuesday nights, our chance to do something we might not do at any other time of the year. That's when we're supposed to go outside, meet the neighbors for National Night Out in Texas. Police department's encouraging everyone, turn on the porch lights, go out and say hey. There are events going on all over the area for National Night Out. And one of the biggest events every year is in the city of Arlington. On today's Ask the Expert, we're joined by Tim Ciesco from the Arlington PD in the KRLD Zoom room. Tim, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you guys for having me. We appreciate you wanting to talk about this.
This is the question that you get asked every year. You'd think the answer would be obvious, but we have to ask it. Why do we have National Night Out in October and not in August when the rest of the country does?
Well, I think anybody who went outside in August, especially this year, would know that the temperatures are not too pleasant here in August. And this is supposed to be a pleasant night, a fun night for people to get out and enjoy being outside, talking with their neighbors, meeting their police officers. But when it's that hot, that's hard to do. So we in Texas push it back to October when the weather's at least a little cooler, we hope, and look forward to that every year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a great opportunity, as Rankin just said, to be able to get out of your home, because I feel like so many of us have just become homebodies. If we do commute to work, so we get home, it's like Netflix and chill, get dinner done, just lounge on the couch. We don't really interact with neighbors as often as I think maybe the generation before us did. And especially even more so or less of the case for kids, getting them also acclimated, knowing the parents and just the new people in town.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've find over and over again is that when neighbors communicate with each other, when they know each other, when they're looking out for each other, when they're calling in things that don't seem quite right that they notice in their neighborhood, that's when we make the biggest impact on crime. So that's one of the reasons we have this night, not just for our officers to get to know folks out in the community, which we want as well, but for neighbors to make sure that they are interacting and having those conversations, getting to know one another so that, should something happen, a weather situation, a suspicious person, that that you have other people there right by you looking out for you.
And the thing is neighbors have been trying to get together, but they do it virtually through various apps like Nextdoor. But it's not the same, is it?
No, virtual connection definitely is not the same as that face-to-face interaction through computers. And I think that's part of the reason you see some of the shortcomings of society these days. You kind of say whatever you want, but because you don't have a face to the name, some people may misunderstand things or may feel they have a way to say things that they wouldn't say to a person to their face. But I think when you have that make that person-to-person connection face-to-face, that's where you start to really build that trust. You can see that person, you get to know that person, get to have a conversation with that person, as opposed to just a few, comments over the internet.
I think it's so important to know your neighbors. And I think of when I was a kid, one time I missed the bus and my parents were out of town. I had a babysitter and she didn't drive. And so I was like, oh, I've got to go to school. I cannot skip today. I'll be even more hot water than I was already from missing the bus. And I remembered a kid that lived down the street. He was like the bus stop before me. And I went and knocked on their door. Come to find out, his dad was home and he was a Marine. My dad is a Marine. And just from that instance, I had to call my dad and tell him I missed the bus, but that our neighbor was taking me to school. Everything would be fine. But they ended up connecting and hitting it off and were friends for a long time. And I think about, man, if that would have never happened, would they have ever met, even though we were maybe 2-3 blocks away from each other? But my parents, to be honest, they're workaholics and they just never go out. How do you convince folks to take the time to actually go to this event, not only for time reasons, but also just the fact that sometimes you think about putting, the police in the conversation. People are like, oh, no, I'm not going.
Well, one of the reasons that we like to be involved in this event, I'll speak to that first, is because, like you mentioned, a lot of times when police are involved in something, it's usually because somebody's having a bad day or something bad is happening. And we don't want all of our interactions with the public to be like that. Certainly we are here to help them whenever they are having that bad day, and that's our job. But we want them to know that we are here to serve them. And so any opportunity we have to meet them and have a conversation with them in a relaxed environment, in a situation where they're not having an emergency, those are the opportunities that we really look for. Again, to your point about your dad and your neighbor down the street, you'd be surprised, just even when you're outside getting out of your car and you see your neighbor pull up, just waving to them, saying hi, and maybe striking a conversation that way, how big of a difference that can make in some of these relationships that you might forge that you wouldn't have otherwise. And so that's why we really try to encourage everyone to come together in sort of this, again, more relaxed environment. That way, if you are dealing with that situation down the road, not only do you have police officers that you can turn to for help, but you also have neighbors that that you can turn to for help.
Do the officers themselves enjoy doing National Night Out events?
They absolutely do enjoy doing national night out events. In the past, I think we've had upwards of 140 to almost 200 events, and we try to get officers to every single one of those. A lot of times, we see them out at cookouts. People are feeding them, so they definitely love that. But for the officers too, because they're dealing with a lot of those emergency situations all day, they love getting to interact with the community in a non-emergency situation. This is kind of like a nice break, a nice breather for them, if you will, from the demands of their daily job. And so this is something that they all really like. We always see officers out at parties talking to people, passing out stickers to kids. I think last year, I remember one of our officers even was riding a little train that a community had set up for some of the kids, just hanging out with them and answering some of the questions that they have. Because as you know, kids have a million questions and aren't afraid to ask them to anyone. And so, yes, I think our officers do have a really fun time out at these events.
It's Tim Ciesco from the Arlington PD. Tim, thank you as always.
Thank you, guys.